What's up, my fellow Shield Brothers? It is ShieldBros6 for the History Armada. Welcome back for your weekly dose of history, and today we are talking about Shays' Rebellion on August 29th, 1786. So, it is the anniversary of the beginning of the rebellion, which is why we shall be dwelling on this event and its significance in the course of American history. Shays' Rebellion was a series of violent attacks on courthouses and other government properties throughout Massachusetts that began in August 29th, 1786, and led to a full-blown military confrontation in 1787. These rebels were mostly ex-Revolutionary War soldiers who had become farmers, who felt opposed to state economic policies causing poverty and property foreclosures due to high tax increases, the very thing that they had taken a stand against. The rebellion was named after Daniel Shays, a farmer and former soldier who had fought at Bunker Hill and was one of the several leaders of this insurrection. So what caused Shays' Rebellion? The farmers who fought in the Revolutionary War had received little compensation for their efforts, and by the 1780s, many were struggling to make ends meet. Business in Boston and elsewhere demanded immediate payment for goods that farmers had previously bought on credit and often paid off through barter. There was no paper money in circulation at this time, and no gold or silver to be accessed by the farmers to settle these debts, due to the Articles of Confederation having very small effects on such matters. At the same time, Massachusetts residents were expected to pay higher taxes than they had ever paid to the British in order to assure that Governor James Bowdoin, business associate, would receive a good return on their investments. So the very thing that they had taken a stand against, they were now paying even more than that. They were making sure that the governor at the time, that his business and his business associates were getting good income from their efforts. With no means to move their crops and make money to pay off debts and taxes, Boston authorities began to arrest the farmers and foreclose their lands. This marks the beginning of the rebellion. Farmers first attempted peaceful means to settle their issues. As usual, they went to negotiate. They were like, hey, this is not working. In the August of 1786, farmers in western Massachusetts began to take direct action against debtors' courts. Committees of town leaders drafted a document of grievances and proposed reforms, some considered radical for the legislature in Boston to enact. But other actions began to take place. In Northampton, Captain Joseph Hines led several hundred men to block judges from entering the courthouses. They were joined by a contingent from Amherst and several hundred more men from elsewhere. In Worcester, judges were blocked from holding court by crowds in hundreds of armed men. When the militia was called in, these men refused to answer, and many joined the crowd around the courthouse rather than having them disperse. So even the militia were standing with these farmers. So that brings us to Daniel Shays. Daniel Shays, for whom the rebellion is actually named, as I mentioned, was a farmer in Pelham and an ex-soldier who had even served at the Battle of Bunker Hill, which was a significant Revolutionary War battle. Shays became involved with the insurgents sometime in the summer of 1786, and had taken part in the Northampton action. He was offered a leadership position in August, but he refused. Soon, however, Shays was leading a sizable group, and the Eastern elite claimed he was the leader of the entire rebellion and a potential dictator. But Shays was only one leader in this host of rebellion. In September, Shays led a group of 600 men to shut down the court in Springfield. Determined to use peaceful means, he negotiated with General William Shepherd for the court to open while allowing protesters to parade. The court eventually closed down when it couldn't find any jurors who would serve. It concerned Henry Knox, an artillery commander during the Revolutionary War, and he would be future first U.S. Secretary of War. He wrote to George Washington in 1786 to warn him about these rebels. Henry Knox is quoted saying, quote, "They see the weakness of government," talking about the Articles of Confederation, "and they feel at once their own poverty compared with the opulent, and their own force, and they are determined to make us use of the latter in order to remedy the former. Their creed is that the property of the United States has been protected from the confiscations of Britain by the joint exertions of all. So he's talking about how they fought the Revolutionary War together to keep Britain from taking their stuff, and therefore ought to be common property for all, so they feel that they should have compensation. Our government must be braced, changed, or altered to secure our lives, security, and property. End quote. So he's talking about remedies of the Articles of Confederation. So Shay's rebellion escalates, and this leads us to the attack on Springfield Arsenal. So the insurgents found support in unexpected places. Chief Justice William Whiting of the Berkshire County Court was a wealthy conservative who publicly spoke out in favor of the rebellion, accusing the wealthy state legislature of making money off of the impoverished farmers and claiming the farmers were obligated to disrupt government in response to these actions against them. Legendary patriot Samuel Adams, however, called for the execution of these rebellious farmers. The Massachusetts legislature offered leniency and flexibility to those with tax burdens. Amnesty was also offered to the rebels if they disavowed the efforts to close the courts. The farmers were expected to take oaths of allegiance and apology to the state government. However, a bill was passed excusing sheriffs from responsibility if they killed any insurgents and declaring harsh punishments for rebels in custody. So they're giving with one hand and taking away with the other. Soon after, this legislature suspended the writ of habeas corpus for a period of time. Another bill prescribed the death penalty for militiamen who took part in the protests. So if you're a militiaman, one of the Minutemen, and you take part in one of the protests, you are thereby prescribed the death penalty. Think about that for a second. So in January 1787, Governor Bowdoin hired his own army of privately funded Boston businessmen. Some 4,400 men under the command of General Benjamin Lincoln were directed to put down the insurgents. Which brings us to the attack on Springfield Arsenal. Shays and other leaders made plans to raid the federal arsenal in Springfield to procure weapons. On the snow-covered morning of January 25, 1787, 1,200 insurgents approached the arsenal. Some men had guns, while some carried clubs or swords or pitchforks. General Shepherd predicted the assault and was waiting in the arsenal. Shepherd believed the insurgents planned to overthrow the government, which is not entirely true. They just wanted justification for the taxes against them and compensation for their duties. General Shepherd predicted this, and meanwhile, General Lincoln's troops were marching from Worcester to Springfield to provide additional defense. Two other groups of insurgents traveled quickly to join Shays. Another rebellion leader, Luke Day, who had ridden to Quebec with Benedict Arnold in 1775, would head from the north with 400 more men. Eli Parsons would lead additionally another 600 men from the Berkshires. As they approached the arsenals, shots were fired at Shays and his men. The first two were warning shots over their head, but further shots left 2 rebels dead and 20 wounded coming out of the arsenal. The rest retreated to Chippewa, sending a message to Shepherd demanding the dead for burial. So they pulled back, but they sent letters demanding that they would be allowed to bury their slain and help their wounded. Lincoln sent troops up the Connecticut River to prevent advances from Day's group. Shays and his men led to Persham. Lincoln followed, causing them to scatter and disperse. Shays and his wife then fled to Vermont. So that means we must, although it was quickly put down, we need to talk about the aftermath. So attempts to rekindle the rebellion from Vermont with the Revolutionary War leader Ethan Allen then failed. Allen quietly gave former rebels refuge in Vermont, but publicly disavowed them, kind of playing both fields. The Boston legislature passed the Disqualification Act banning rebels from serving on juries, holding public office, voting, or working as schoolmasters, innkeepers, or liquor salesmen for 3 years. So for 3 years they are punished for their actions of rising up. By the summer of 1787, many participants in the rebellion received pardons from newly elected Governor John Hancock. Because if you remember, John Hancock is known for his signature because it was large and flowing because he wanted King George III to be able to see it without using his spectacles. So I feel that it is quite justifying that the man who wanted to be known to be part of the Revolutionary War is standing up for these farmers. Because if you really think about it, these farmers were doing exactly what they had done during the Revolutionary War. They felt cheated, they felt outsed, and they were in poverty, so they were standing up against what they felt was an unfair government. And now they are being punished for the very ideals that this country was founded on. So it is justifying that Governor John Hancock would be on the side of these men. The new legislature placed a hold of sorts on debts and cut taxes, easing the economic burden the rebels were struggling to overcome. Some rebels were publicly paraded to the gallows before they were released. 2 were executed for burglary. Shays, however, was pardoned the following year. He returned to Pelham briefly, then moved to Sparta, New York, where his legend made him a popular attraction for visitors. He died in 1825 and was laid to rest in an unmarked grave. Kind of a sad ending to this patriot and insurgent. Shays is memorialized by the Daniel Shays Highway in western Massachusetts, however, a section of U.S. Route 202 built in 1935 to commemorate him that runs through Pelham. So, what is the significance of the short-lived Shays Rebellion? At the time, Shays Rebellion in the newly formed United States was governed by the Articles of Confederation, as I had mentioned several times. This document that many in the country felt was too weak to effectively manage the fledgling nation. So, this is kind of confirming the fears of some of the Americans that the Articles of Confederation was not strong enough to govern the people or protect them. So this rebellion was kind of confirming this for them. Additionally, the specter of Shays' Rebellion informed the debate over the framing of the new U.S. Constitution, providing fuel to Alexander Hamilton's fire and other Federalists who advocated for a stronger federal government and diminished states' rights. So Alexander Hamilton saw this and he was like, oh look, I'm right, we do need that strength in federal government. Look what they're doing without it. Nationalists, however, used the rebellion to heighten paranoia, and George Washington was convinced enough by their arguments to come out of retirement and take part in the Constitutional Convention, where he was elected the very first president of the United States. Before this, he had been retired after the Revolutionary War was put to rest and everything had been settled with the Articles of Confederation. But the Nationalists, their arguments were so convincing to George Washington that he comes out of retirement and convenes at the Constitutional Convention and eventually is elected the first president. So in some ways, I guess it is good because we get the Constitution out of this and we get George Washington as the first president out of this. So both of those are very significant events, but it's a shame that it had to happen in such a way. Shay's name was often mentioned in attacks by the Federalists against critics of the Constitution, who were referred at the time as Shayists. When the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention began, many communities in Massachusetts that supported Shays' Rebellion sent delegates that had taken part in it. Of the 97 Shayist towns sending delegates, only 7 would vote in favor of the Constitution. But however, the Constitution would pass, and we would get George Washington as president. So really, it just added fuel to the fire for both sides of the Federalists and the Nationalists. And you can see how that kind of plays out for American history. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned a little bit about Daniel Shay, and I hope you learned a little bit about Shays' Rebellion and why it was important for fledgling the United States. Other than that, though, if you have any other ideas or comments or suggestions or concerns for videos or anything at all, leave that in the comment section down for me below. If you liked this video, please go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button for me. And other than that, I will see you hopefully next week for another weekly dose of history. And I am ShieldBros6 for the History Armada, and I will catch y'all next time. Thanks for watching.